Hey, I'm Rebecca from the blog and YouTube channel Moon and Magnolia, and I know that with the price of food in restaurants right now, going out for pizza or having a family pizza night at home with delivery might just be too expensive. And I also know that with the hustle and bustle of daily life, making a homemade pizza might not be in the cards right now. But I'm going to show you today how to batch prep sourdough pizza dough so that way you can have homemade pizza that is convenient and definitely more nutritious and way cheaper. The first step to really simplifying batch prepping pizza dough is to use a stand mixer. You can, of course, knead all of your pizza dough by hand, but it is a lot easier to deal with this if you're using a stand mixer. So the way I then determine how much pizza dough I'm going to use is I figure out how much starter I have. So I don't really plan this too far ahead in advance, but essentially I feed my starter to fill up this jar. And what I'm going to do is for every batch of pizza dough, I need 100 grams of starter. So I'm just going to put 100 grams of starter in here as many times as I can until I am just about out of starter. Don't forget to leave a little bit of starter left over to save for feeding and for your next sourdough project. And now how many pizza crusts you get with each batch or each 100 grams of sourdough depends on how big you want your pizza. For us, this is roughly about 4 pizzas. So it looks like I think I have enough, for 3 batches of pizza dough. So that is 12 crusts. So if we eat pizza once a month, for the next year, I will have enough dough for an entire year's worth of pizza. You might hear people say things like, oh, to make the perfect pizza crust, you need to use 00 pizza flour. It does make a good pizza crust, but often those specialty flours are more expensive and they are harder to find. And if the goal here is to make nutritious food that is budget friendly and simple, we should just stick with all-purpose flour. So I'm going to add a whopping 1,350 grams of all-purpose flour to my stand mixer bowl. I'm going to add some fresh milled whole wheat flour to this pizza dough recipe. You could use regular store-bought whole wheat flour, that's totally fine, but adding a little bit of whole wheat flour boosts the nutrition, which is one of the benefits of making your own pizza dough. If you buy a pizza from a pizza place and have it delivered, for example, you just get what you get. But when you make your own, you can add in extra nutrition. And now I am using fresh milled grains because they have the most nutrition. When you mill your own flour, you retain all of the nutritional value of the wheat berry. So I am going to use fresh milled, but you can definitely use store-bought whole wheat for added nutrition. Now we add in this case, 1,050 grams of water. This is a lot of ingredients. The starter, the flour, and the water, I tend to measure relatively precisely, give or take a few grams, because that really determines the consistency of your dough. But when it comes to the salt and the olive oil, I'm not quite as precise. I know that this little spoon is about a teaspoon, so I'm going to add 6 of these into the rest of the ingredients. And now I'm gonna add in 6 tablespoons of olive oil, and we will get to mixing this dough. So I have this giant bowl of ingredients, and I'm going to just simply put this in my stand mixer. And the first thing I'm going to do is set it on low speed and let it combine. This is a lot of ingredients, so it's really important to make sure that if you are batch prepping dough like this and using a stand mixer, that you don't overwork your machine. So I just want to first make sure that my stand mixer can handle this much dough. If not, I'll split it up, but let's just see what happens. Okay, sorry if that's a little loud, but the dough is combined and so far so good. So I'm gonna bump up the speed and let this go for a minute, and then we'll check and just make sure everything is good to go. It's only been a couple of minutes, and one of the things I'm noticing is this dough is really sticky, and I think that's for a couple of reasons. One, fresh milled flour takes a little bit longer to absorb water, so that could be part of it. But also, just the flour you buy in the store is different. I recently got a bulk bag of flour from Costco, and I have noticed everything I had made with that flour is just stickier, and I need to add more flour. So what we're looking for is for your pizza dough to not stick to your hand. So if I touch this dough, this is what I get. We don't want that. It's okay if like a little bit of dough sticks to your hands, that it feels like a little tacky, but this is way too sticky. Now to handle this, what I do is add about a tablespoon of flour at a time until it reaches my desired consistency. This is a pretty big batch of dough, so I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons of flour at a time, and we'll see how many it takes just to get it the right consistency. But that's really sticky. It actually took a lot more flour to reach my desired consistency than what I usually need. It's pretty normal to have to add flour or a little bit more water to dough recipes just based on the flour that you're using, the humidity in the air. But like I said, that particular flour that I got, the flour even feels a little wet. So it took a lot more than I anticipated, but that really underscores the importance of knowing how dough is supposed to look and feel. And that just comes through experience. And I actually think that pizza dough is a really great place to start with that because it's forgiving. You can make a lot of mistakes with pizza dough and it still works out totally fine. All right, here's a year's worth of pizza dough for my family. So you can see it is a little tacky. It might be kind of hard to see. Let's see if I can get a better view for you here. It is a little bit tacky, but it is not making a huge mess of my hands. For pizza dough, you do want a dough that is smooth, that is not a sloppy mess on your hands, but that is a little bit tacky still. And it doesn't necessarily need to pass the window pane test because for pizza dough, we aren't necessarily going for that gluten structure that we are for bread. So this is a lot more forgiving. So not only is it super cheap, it's also a lot easier than a lot of other dough products. So now this dough sits covered with a wet towel for about 8 hours to ferment. And I know that sounds like a really long time. And when you hear 8 hours, you're like, wow, that's like too long for me to deal with. But actually, I think that that's what makes sourdough easier than commercial yeast. I am not tethered now to this dough for another 8 hours or so. When you make dough with commercial yeast, it is fast for sure, and it tastes great too, but it only takes like an hour or two for your dough to rise often. So that means you have to be available right then to deal with the next step of the process. But for this, now for 8 hours, I'm just gonna go live my life. So I really find that batch prepping sourdough products like this helps me because it gives me more time to do other things. So the next step of the process is when my child is in bed, it's quiet, I can handle it, and it is just a lot easier that way. It is 8 hours later, so let's check out this dough. This has definitely doubled in size, and you can see it's starting to dome on the top. And like I said before, pizza dough, it's pretty forgiving. So if it's not exactly double, if it isn't entirely domed, in fact, mine is not perfectly domed on top, it is going to work out just fine. So the next step is we just need to divide, shape, and package this up. So how you divide this is really up to you. It depends on how big you want your pizzas, how large your family is. There are 3 of us in my home and one of us is 3 years old. So we don't need huge pizzas. So for us, dividing this into 12 is perfect, but really you can make these as big or as small as you want. And I don't get too wrapped up in making them perfect or weighing them. So I just eyeball it. If you wanted to, you could weigh out the dough so that way you have perfectly even dough balls for pizza later. I don't do that. And because I do have a small child, if one ends up kind of small, I just make her a little mini pizza and she loves it anyway. So it works out great for us. And just so you can see the texture of this dough, you can see it is really smooth. It still is a little bit sticky, which is fine, but a lot of that extra moisture has absorbed into the flour. So even if you have a slightly sticky dough before the bulk fermentation, it will probably be less sticky after the bulk fermentation. Now, if your dough is like a soupy, watery mess after bulk fermentation, that probably means that it over fermented. If your dough does over ferment, you can turn it into focaccia, you can fry it up into fry breads, make it into tortillas. You can really do a lot of things with it. So it's not wasted if that happens. You can even throw it on a hot stone to make a pizza with it. It just isn't exactly pizza dough at that point. But that's the nice thing, that it doesn't go to waste even if it has over fermented. But this did not over ferment. It's beautiful. Let's shape it. So all I'm doing is sort of squeezing this into a ball. And then I will use the friction on the counter to turn the dough and create tension, which will help it hold its shape. Okay, so we have 12 dough balls here, and they are varying sizes, but like I said, that works okay for us because sometimes it might just be my daughter that's eating pizza, sometimes it's just the two of us, and I'll use the larger ones when we are all three having the same pizza. So all I'm going to do now is just put each dough ball in its own plastic sandwich bag. One little trick for picking up the dough is to wet your hands. So usually the top of the dough, once you have shaped it, it develops a skin and you can touch it without it getting sticky or anything, but on the bottom of the dough, it can get a little sticky and it can ruin your shaping when you pick it up. So I just take a bench scraper, I swoop underneath and with a wet hand hold the dough, and that allows me to put it right into the sandwich bag without it sticking to my hands. And now that they are all in their own sandwich bags, I'm going to put them in a large freezer Ziploc bag. So I don't think I can fit all 12 of them in there, which is no big deal. So you might need a couple of freezer bags for this. Don't forget to label and date it so you know what it is down the road. And here we have 1 year's worth of pizza dough. So I did have to divide it into 2 bags. So there's 6 in each bag. And I really wouldn't recommend like squishing them tight in there because you don't want the dough to get too compact. It's okay if it loses its shape a little bit because you're probably, of course, going to shape it into a pizza whenever you thaw it and use it, but you don't want it to get too squished up. These need about 24 hours to freeze, but once they are frozen, they will last in your freezer for a year. So you can make this much or more, however much pizza dough you want, and keep it in your freezer and have it available for an entire year. And that is significantly cheaper. It is way healthier and it makes it possible for you to have homemade pizza even on busy nights. The trick to being able to use pizza dough on busy nights or any night is to make sure you thaw it in advance. So I take mine out of the freezer and I either put it on the countertop all day or I stick it in the fridge the night before and let it thaw. Once it thaws, you can just shape it like you would any pizza, top it like you would any pizza, and I bake mine at 500 degrees for 10 minutes. So once it's thawed, between shaping, topping the pizza, and baking it, it is about a 15, maybe 20-minute process. So you can have a homemade pizza with homemade dough in 15 to 20 minutes any night. Between grocery budgets and time constraints, this solves a huge problem for our family, and I hope it solves one for your family too. Now, if you want to keep this recipe and you want to keep the instructions readily available, you can actually go right to the share button right here on YouTube and pin this video on any of your Pinterest boards. So that way you can have it there. And when you're ready, you can just go right back to this video and get all the instructions and the recipe. And if you want to start a sourdough journey and you don't know where to begin, click the link below in the description box for my free simple guide to making and using Sourdough Starter. It is a 30+ page ebook that will guide you through all the steps of making your own sourdough starter, making your first loaf of bread, making discard recipes, and more. So once you get your starter established using those guides, you can make this sourdough pizza dough really easily. And last but not least, don't forget to sign up for the email list so you can get all of my recipes, tutorials, and videos straight to your inbox. I'll leave a link for that in the description box below. I hope you found this helpful. I hope it solves a couple problems for you when it comes to making scratch-made food in your home in a way that is reasonable and efficient and affordable. Thanks so much for stopping by today, and I will see you again next time.